Good evening. How are we tonight? Good. My name is Van Dempsey. I'm Dean of the Watson College of Education at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. It is my pleasure to welcome you tonight to this event. We have the pleasure and the opportunity to host NC Spin. Tom Campbell, our moderator, is going to explain a little bit about the show and the panel and what's going to happen tonight in just a few minutes. Before I turn it over to Tom, a few people I need to thank and make sure they get the recognition they deserve. Do we have any of the Watson student leaders in the room? Okay, stand up. And if anyone wants to turn and show off the t-shirt, please feel free to do that. These folks have been instrumental in helping to put this together. The Watson College Alumni Association, which is going to co-host the reception with us after the debate and the Q&A is over. So thank them tonight when you see them at the reception. Are Carrie Fowler and Jan Psycho in the room? They met there. Stand up. Nicole Gatesy. These folks have been working hard to make this happen. And I want to thank, finally, before we make our transition, Susan Finley, would you please stand up? Susan has made it possible for Tom to actually coordinate this with Susan and me not be involved, which is why this is happening. So we should thank Susan, if you get a chance, for helping to put this together. This is a great night for me. Just I have to tell you, as a person who is an avid watcher of the show every Saturday morning, either on television or on an iPad, I'm watching the show. I'm following what's going on, the debate, the topics that are discussed, particularly when those topics are about education in North Carolina and how they might affect learning, how they might affect schools, how they might affect higher education, how they might affect the Watson College of Education and the work that we do. So the show itself is a great resource in terms of what I know and the information that I have as a dean and being able to see what's out on the landscape in North Carolina. You'll see a flavor of that tonight, I am sure, as we work through education topics. So I want to thank Tom and the panelists who've come tonight for giving us this evening, for giving us this opportunity to engage in this conversation with them. So I hope everyone has a great evening.
First of all, let me just say how delighted we all are to be here on this great campus and to see just how vibrant this university has become through the years, because many of us remember some of its foundling days, and it is just an incredible testament. I tell people in North Carolina, this is one of the great secrets in our university system. I also tell parents, if you send your kid to UNC Wilmington, you will never see them again. They won't come home. They will fall in love with the university. They'll fall in love with Wilmington itself. They just don't come back. Boone and Wilmington are the two places where kids go, and we never see them again. We are so delighted to be here. Particularly to talk about these issues. I know that there will be people who will be coming in who were trying to fight traffic to get here at what is obviously the high traffic time. Although I got to tell you, driving in on College and Market, I just soon drive the Beltline in Raleigh. Yeah. I'll tell you, absolutely, it's something. We've been doing this now for a little over 18 years. Last night we taped our 961st show. We have more episodes than MASH, All in the Family, Friends, Seinfeld, all rolled up together. We will record our 1,000th show in December of this year, and we're planning some celebrations around that. Chris Fitzsimon, John Hood, and I met at lunch at TK Trips on Wade Avenue in Raleigh, almost 19 years ago now. It was in the summer of 1998. And over a napkin, we sat down and kind of penciled out the format for this show. And it has pretty much remained the same format throughout the entire time. The goal of the show from the get-go was to try to provide balanced debate for North Carolina. We started the show because we felt like, in many instances, especially in the television news business, you get a little snippet of a story, but you don't get much detail about the story. And then we also felt like there is biases in reporting, and oftentimes you see those biases in the articles or the stories that are reported. We wanted to make sure that people had an opportunity to hear more than one perspective. I tell people all the time, we do not think it is our job to convince you or convict you one way or another on a particular issue. We think it's our job to expose you to different ideas and trust you enough to have the ability to be able to make up your own mind about the right and wrong of particular issues. We tout ourselves as balanced debate for the Old North State, and there are some occasions where it isn't, but in the main, I think week in and week out, we do a pretty good job of this. I mentioned John Hood earlier. Many of you who saw the early promotion and publicity will note that John was supposed to be with us tonight. 2 weeks ago, and this is a very, very rare occurrence with John, he came down with that strain A flu. And he has been flat on his back in bed for 2 weeks. He called me up Monday morning, and in between the hacking and the coughing and everything else, informed me that he was not going to be able to be down here and was very disappointed. I think it's the first time we've done a personal appearance. He has not been with us. But he said, "You don't want me, first of all," but he said, "I don't think I can do it, and I've had doctor's orders to stay in bed." So he apologizes to each of you for not being able to be here. In addition to thanking Dean Dempsey and also Susan Finley, I also want to give a shout out to our broadcast affiliates here in southeastern North Carolina. First of all, show of hands. How many of you see us on television or hear us on radio or watch us, on a fairly regular basis? The rest of you, why not? We do this, a fresh show every single week, 52 weeks a year. Thoroughly enjoy doing it and are able to do it principally because of the broadcast partners that we have throughout the course of the state. And among those broadcast partners are WILM here in Wilmington. We're on Saturday mornings at 8 o'clock. And also WAAV Radio. We're on Sunday afternoons at 5:30 on them. And you can always stream us just about any time you like on our website, www.ncspin.com. Well, enough about all of that. Let me introduce the panel that we have with us this evening, and tell you, by the way, before we do that, what the format is going to be. We're going to do roughly 45, 55 minutes worth of discussion about issues. We want to leave enough time, however, for you to be able to ask questions. I think there's some handheld mics around. We will ask you to be thinking about, during the course of the discussion, any questions that you might have that you would like to pose to the panel. They do not have to be about education. They can be about anything that you like. I will warn you in advance that if you use this as an opportunity to stand up and pontificate and make a speech, I'm going to interrupt you and ask if there's a question in here somewhere. So just be prepared for that fact, because we do want this to be question and answer instead of opportunities for speeches. Now, let me introduce the panel. On my far right, your left, which is his philosophical and political position and where he prefers to be, is Chris Fitzsimon. Chris is a native of Charlotte, went to UNC Chapel Hill, majored in the journalism school, actually started out as a news reporter for WITN television down in Washington, came up to Raleigh, was the Capitol correspondent for WRAL in Raleigh, When Dan Blue became House Speaker, he became Dan's communications director. He is now the executive director of NC Policy Watch, which is a think tank, as you might expect, leaning toward the left side. Chris does a lot of speeches across the state, writes syndicated columns in North Carolina, and as I said before, he's one of the founding members of our panel on every single week. Candidly, one of the brightest political minds I know in North Carolina, and we're delighted to have Chris be with us tonight. I told you John couldn't be here, so last Monday morning, about 10:30, I'm frantically on the phone, and I'm talking to Becky, and I'm talking to Chris, and through the hacking and coughing, I'm talking to John, and I'm trying to talk to Susan, and I'm saying, you know, we got a problem here. John's not going to be here, and we need someone who can speak intelligently about education, particularly higher education. And so a number of names got thrown out. But there was one name that just resonated with everybody, and that's Hannah Dawson Gage. She's Hannah Dawson to me, I'm sorry. I've known Hannah more years than either one of us want to remember. She comes from a very storied family in the broadcast business. Her father was one of my heroes and a contemporary of my father in the business. Hannah herself has had a very successful career in broadcasting. And in addition to that, has served on the Board of Governors now for over 12 years, including being chairman of the UNC Board of Governors. She's chairman emeritus now, or chair emeritus, I guess it's a better way of saying it, be politically correct. And so, and we'll be cycling off this summer, and we'll get a little of an opportunity to rest because I want to bring her back as a panelist on our show from time to time. To my left and to the right is Howard Lee. Howard was the very first African-American mayor of a large city in the South, in Chapel Hill. He's a businessman, been a very successful businessman. He's been very involved in politics throughout the course of his life, has even run statewide for office, has served in many capacities in the Hunt administration, as well as a state senator and chair of the State Board of Education for the state of North Carolina. So he's earned his chops, and he has become an addition to our panel over the last couple of years, and we just get rave reviews every time Howard's on the show, and so we are honored and delighted to have Howard with us. And then to my far left and her far right, which is the position she cares to occupy philosophically and politically, is Becky Gray. Becky is a native of Georgia? Atlanta, Georgia. She's a peach. And settled and went to school at Queens College in Charlotte. From there, did some graduate work at Meredith and UNC Chapel Hill. Served as a legislative liaison at one time, and is now the vice president of the John Locke Foundation. She also travels all over the state, making speeches, writing columns, hanging out at the legislature. If I ever have questions about what's going on at the legislature, the three panelists I call Chris, Becky, or Connie Wilson, because they just almost live over there. Becky has just been a great addition to the show and has been with us now for, I guess, 7 or 8 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and subs for John whenever John's not in town or available or sick, which I guess hadn't happened more than 2 or 3 times in the whole time we've been there.
Can I just add something? Tell you something you don't know?
Yes.
My younger daughter, Maggie, is a graduate of UNCW. So
Go
I'm
Seahawks.
very proud of that. And, you know, Tom made a very wise observation that if kids go here to school, they won't come home. And that is the case with my daughter, Maggie, but she is not a beach bum. She is a graduate of the recreational therapy program here at Wilmington and has an extremely rewarding career in Charlotte. She is a taxpayer, and she does not live with me anymore. So,
Wow.
so thank you, UNCW.
So let's get started. I would be, frankly, I doubt very seriously you'd let us get away with it if we didn't talk about the repeal for HB 2, which happened this afternoon, and Governor Cooper signed it into law. A lot took place in the last 24 hours. In fact, I'm going to let you in on a little bit of stage secret. We record our shows every Wednesday night. We do this because we're distributing the shows to television stations in Asheville and Charlotte and Greensboro and Wilmington and Greenville, or actually Newbern, and to a myriad of cable outlets, cable origination stations, low-power television stations, radio stations, and we found that if we don't do it on Wednesday nights, then the tapes don't get to the stations in time to air on the weekends. And so last night, the great dilemma around our set at 7:30 as we were getting ready to start tape was, will they or won't they? All afternoon, there was the start-stop process going on with the repeal of HB 2. So we decided to sort of play it down the middle, and I'll ask you to watch it and tell me how well we did, whether you can tell whether we thought it had been repealed or not. We do now know that HB 2 has been repealed in the face of the deadline from the NCAA, and I want to talk about that a little bit. First of all, let's talk process here. This has been a situation in which it's been on again, off again, it started, it stopped. Becky, why in the world has this been so complicated a process? I mean, everybody's known they want to repeal HB 2 in some form or fashion now, almost since it was passed. Why has this taken so long?
Well, first of all, everybody didn't agree whether to repeal it or not, and it has become
Well,
a very,
all thinking people did.
Well, I don't disagree with you on that. But the fact of the matter, you know, there's 170 people sitting in the North Carolina General Assembly that you have to deal with, and there were people who were just absolutely convinced that they would never repeal HB 2, and there were other people that were absolutely convinced that the only option was to only repeal HB 2, and then you have the group in the middle. And, you know, the legislative process works that you have to have a majority of the votes to do those things. So that was part of the problem of, you know, sort of a third, and a third, and nobody could get to a majority of the votes. There have been 5 or 6 really serious efforts to compromise, to repeal, to do something, all of which have failed until today. And my observation, just looking over it, and of course I think we'll all be talking about this and sort of doing the post-mortem analysis over the next couple of days, but it seemed like, too, that each time a compromise was proposed and failed, the goalposts moved a little bit further away. So it was a little more difficult to get to that next step.
But one of the problems here is, since you were in the legislature and since many of us have been following the legislature, the whole process has changed. We've had the Washingtonization, essentially, of the North Carolina General Assembly, in that the legislature used to be ruled by the Speaker or the Lieutenant Governor, and then after that, the President Pro Tem. Now it's being ruled by caucuses. And part of the problem with the process, Chris, was that in the instance of HB 2, both Speaker Moore as well as Pro Tem Berger, they couldn't get their caucus together to agree on a clean bill or agree on hardly any bill to pull it out.
Well, they both have a rule, whether it's a good rule or not, is that they require a majority of their caucus before they'll bring a bill to the floor. I think there was a lot of speculation that a clean repeal may have come close to passing if it ever had a vote, and that's what Governor Cooper had said. But that would have required, but the majority of Republicans in the House and Senate didn't support that. So it never came to the floor.
And what we ended up with, and this is really sort of the backstage kind of stuff. What they did is they took a bill that had been passed in the House, HB 142, which had nothing whatsoever to do with HB 2. It was a bill for occupational licensing in North Carolina, had been passed by the House, gutted the bill on the Senate floor, added in the new language, and then voted it this morning. Howard, that's become sort of a process that happens more frequently than it used to, isn't it?
No question about it. Of course, this is nothing new to this current legislature because even when Democrats ruled, we would use that process as well. It's one that allows the House that's originating a change of this sort to be able to lock in the other House because you're using one of their bills and they can get it through a lot easier than if you have a new bill coming through, a Senate bill, for example.
When you look at what happened, and we're going to talk specifics about the bill, but the Senate passed it this morning with a 32-16 plurality, and then the House this afternoon with a 70-48, much narrower in the House and much more debate so far as the House was concerned. Hannah, this whole thing had to depend on a deadline from the NCAA so far as postseason sports games.
Yeah,
Evidently, they
it
caved.
makes you wonder, would they ever have reached this decision at all had that not been looming? But I think that, so we've ended up with a bill that sounds like no one will be completely pleased, but
And nobody was.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
on either side.
I think for the university, from the university's perspective, everyone will be relieved, maybe not completely satisfied, but there has been a climate of uncertainty that has existed for a while on campuses. That's uncertainty for gay and transgender students. I think there's uncertainty with the athletic programs. And so, I think that at least we've got some closure here for now.
How many of you have had a chance to read this bill? Yeah, practically nobody. Well, here's the deal. Here's what it says. All multiple-use bathrooms, locker rooms, and changing rooms overseen by state agencies, cities, counties, and school districts are restricted by gender, listed on their birth certificate. You must attend the bathroom that identifies with the gender that is listed on your birth certificate, and only the General Assembly can establish rules for public bathrooms. That's one of the things that it says. It has a non-discrimination clause in it, which says that it will not discriminate against race, religion, color, national origin, age, handicap, or biological sex, or sexual, but it excludes sexual orientation and gender identity. And Chris, this is what's got so many people in the LGBTQ community up in arms.
Well, that's right, and I think they're right to be up in arms. I was really disappointed at this compromise for one reason. This bathrooms, I have problems with what they did with bathrooms too, because I'm worried about our transgender students and our transgender people in North Carolina. But the bathrooms had been out of the discussion for a long time, and what really held it up was, are we going to allow cities and counties in North Carolina to make it illegal to fire people or deny them services because they're gay? That was the whole debate. I think the state itself ought to do that, and there ought to be a state law that does that, but we couldn't get that passed. North Carolina doesn't want to do it. So a lot of states, like South Carolina, in Columbia, South Carolina tonight, if you're a gay person, you cannot be denied service, a hotel room, a taxi cab, served in a restaurant because you're gay. In Raleigh, North Carolina, and Wilmington, North Carolina, you can be. And I just think that is outrageous, and this legislature will not allow local governments to have that opportunity to protect their LGBTQ citizens for 4 years, until 2020, the end of 2020, and I think that was a terrible mistake.
In North Carolina, cities and counties are creations of the legislature and are controlled by the legislature, dominated by the legislature. They have the authority to revoke their charters or grant charters or do anything they want to. Howard, this bill bans the cities and local governments from going beyond state policy and blocks all local non-discrimination ordinances until December of 2020.
And I think that's a shame. I agree with Chris. It's a little bit embarrassing that we would put this kind of restriction on our local governments, because all legislators run around, especially during campaign time, talking about it's the government closest to the people that has a better feel and should be responsible to the people. I just think somewhere we've got to recognize that we've put North Carolina in a position of looking worse than some of the states we used to criticize, like South Carolina and Mississippi. And now Mississippi is looking a whole lot better than North Carolina because they haven't done anything along these lines. So
Becky,
I think we've got to get a hold of this and remove that kind of restriction.
This was presumably because they set 2020 as the date because the court cases that are in process right now, they figured that one way or the other they'd be resolved by then. Was that the reason for that date?
I think so. That's what I had heard. But to kind of circle back on this too, I mean, you know, Chris and Howard spoke to this. It's really has been.
By the way, in the news business, this is what we call a pivot, just so that you'll know. Go ahead.
But the controversy, I mean, a lot of this question is, should cities and counties, should local governments make these decisions, or should it be a statewide decision? And that's what a lot of this controversy has been. You know, is Charlotte authorized to do these things that they did? And so that's what a lot of this question has been over the last year. And one of the things that I thought was really telling today in Governor Cooper's press conference as he signed this bill is, and he said this isn't perfect, but it gives us a lot to talk about, and we have a lot of work to do. And I agree with that. One of the questions that has really been in my mind since all this happened is, if there is a discrimination problem in North Carolina that needs to be addressed in Charlotte, shouldn't we address that also in Wilmington, in Hillsborough, in Asheville? Shouldn't it be addressed across the state? So the other thing that this 2020 deadline does is it gives us a chance to sit back, maybe let things cool off a little bit. I'd like to see us really have a serious discussion about anti-discrimination protections and strengthening across the state rather than leaving that to individual cities and counties.
I asked on the show, and if you watch this week's show, then you'll see this. This is the last question I asked the panelists, but I thought it might be enlightening to bring this up today, too. You know, there have been estimates that HB2 was going to cost us $3.7 billion from the time of its inception over the next few years. There's no question about the fact that it's cost us jobs, it's cost us entertainment events, it's cost us sporting events, most especially our reputation. I told the panel that I was in Florida in January for a conference, and somebody came up and looked at me and they said, "North Carolina, oh yeah, you're the HB2 state." This is somebody from Florida, for Pete's sake. I mean, they know us down there by HB2. Hopefully that will not be the case anymore. The issue is, this has been a black eye on North Carolina, and I don't think anybody can deny that. Well, maybe there are a few people who can, but I think that by and large it has created damage to our state. What did we learn from this? How do we prevent something like HB2 from taking place again in our legislature? Chris?
Well, one thing would be not to do this in a one-day special session, which happened last March, and have hearings. And to Becky's point, there have been many efforts during that special session and since for a year to have a statewide non-discrimination standard. We could have had a study commission meeting the day after that special session for a year and coming up with a plan to allow gay people to work without being fired. It's fascinating to me that you can be a gay couple and get married on Saturday, put a picture of your wedding on your desk on Monday, and be fired if your boss doesn't approve. So we do need to do that. I don't think we should wait 4 years. We shouldn't have been waiting a year, but the moral is, or the lesson is, don't do rush legislation in special sessions.
All right. Becky, what do you say?
One of the lessons that from observing this, I think, is anytime that you have government action, anytime the legislature is going to step into things, I think the first question you need to ask is there a problem? Let's identify the problem, and then are there other ways that we can solve this problem? There are other alternatives for us, you know, before you have these things like the Charlotte ordinance that then resulted in HB2. So I think the lesson I learned is the first thing we ought to ask is there a problem and how can we solve it? And, you know, if not, then just move on to something else.
I've said in columns throughout the state for a long time, HB2 was a solution in search of a problem. Yeah. Howard, what did we learn from this?
Well, I think we've learned that we can't, one size does not fit all. Some people don't know that in 1966, North Carolina did not have a law that would allow me to buy a house outside of the traditional black community. And even Chapel Hill refused to sell me a house in 1966, and I had to use the federal law in order to ultimately buy that house. Then we passed a local ordinance because the state refused to pass an open housing ordinance. So I think what we've learned is that one size does not fit all, and we need to respect local governments. But finally, I hope that as a result of going through this, our leaders will recognize it is important to sit down in a room, let cooler heads prevail, have conversation, and come out with a process that will work.
Anything to add to that?
No, I think that good policy is thoughtful policy, and I don't think this was thoughtful policy. And I think that we made a lot of mistakes. Hopefully we do learn from that.
Well, I do want to finally switch off to what we're here to talk about tonight, which is education, especially higher education. I think we've probably given that enough publicity. Former UNC President Bill Friday, who was a friend to a lot of us, used to boast that the UNC system was the crown jewel in the state of North Carolina. And prior to 1971, the UNC Consolidated University consisted of UNC Chapel Hill, NC State, and what was then called Woman's College in Greensboro. It's now UNCG. Hannah, these are challenging times. There's no question about it for folks in higher education. In the past 2 years, the 16-campus system has experienced the firing of a system president, budget cuts, naming a new president, a major academic scandal at one of the flagship universities. You say that Bill Friday, if he was around, would still say this is one of the crown jewel in the state of North Carolina. Tell us why.
He would, and I agree with him. There's no question that we have taken our share, or we have committed a lot of unforced errors and had lots of negative publicity in the last couple of years. But separate from those headlines, I think is something that's more important, and that is the university's enormous capacity for good. That hasn't been diminished by headlines. We are always going to have something when you've got a system this complex that's going to grab the news. I think that if people look at the university and the 220,000 students that we're educating now as intellectual batteries, and that's what I do. I look at the work that's going on, and the batteries are being charged while the students are on the campuses, and then they spread out across the state. Hopefully they stay in the state, and they bring energy and skills. So I don't think that reputationally we took some knocks. We deserved it. But I think in terms of the universities, the role the university plays in the life of the state and the life of the people of this state is not changed.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. We started the first state-supported university in the country, in the nation, even before there was a nation, for that matter. The principal role was to teach the boys, primarily, of the farmers and the people in North Carolina, later expanding to girls, of course. But the role has continued to expand. Now the university system is into research and economic development. The university system operates a huge hospital system throughout the state in all different places. A number of ancillary services. And Howard, there are some people saying, whoa, time out. We've lost our focus here with the university. It's time to rein in and remember our primary mission was educating young men and women. Do you think it's time to refocus?
I do not, because the services and the focus that you highlighted are very integral to instruction. And we train doctors, and so we have a hospital that not only trains doctors, but it also treats people in the process of training
But
those
that's gotten way beyond the teaching hospital at UNC Chapel Hill. I mean, they've got tentacles, hospitals all over the state now.
And that's part of it, because we are a growing nation, we are a growing state. Our population, when I came here, was something like 6 million. Today, North Carolina is going to become the 9th largest state in the nation, if it hasn't already reached that. And so we have needs that are going to need to be met. For example, when East Carolina was building its medical school, it was to be able to serve more effectively people in the eastern part of the state. It has done that. And we've turned out some wonderful doctors, and those doctors are practicing all over the world. So I think for someone to think a university should be today what it was in the 19th century is totally missing what a university should be and what this university system has become. I go back to my one size does not fit all. A student can come to Wilmington and have a variety of experiences, but they can also go to Chapel Hill and learn how to be effective researchers to find answers to problems and resolve difficulties.
Boy, I remember that. You talking about East Carolina. My dad was in the legislature when Bill Friday was fighting Bob Morgan and Leo Jenkins to get that med school established down in East Carolina, and boy, it was something. All right, let's talk about the governance structure here a little bit, Chris. Both for the university as well as K-12 and community colleges. 3 separate organizations, 3 totally different governance structures. With the university system, we've got the UNC system president and the general administration. We got the board of governors. We got to put the legislature in here somewhere.
They'll put themselves in.
Yeah, that's right. We've got the individual chancellors on the various campuses, 16 campuses across the state, and then they have boards for each of the campuses. The boards of governors are appointed by the legislature. The board of governors then selects the president. The president recommends the chancellors. So that's the structure for universities. Now we get down to K-12, and we've got an elected state superintendent. We've got a state board of education, which is appointed or has been appointed by the governor. We've got, in addition to that, the legislature, again, meddling all through that process with laws and funding and so forth like that. Then you move to the individual school systems. There are, 123 different school systems now?
115.
115 different school systems. And each of them has a superintendent and a local board of education. And the whole thing for K-12 education is very cloudy. And then you get to the community colleges, 58 community colleges. You got a state office with a state president, and a state board, which, by the way, has very little power when you get right down to it. And then you go to the individual campuses. Each of them has a president, and you got a system where they have boards of directors, many of whom are appointed by county commissioners and by legislators and also by the governor. Chris, is it time for us to realize that this is a very disjointed way to run education in North Carolina and find some commonality here and maybe even have an education czar?
Well,
well, some states do and operate, one person.
well, I think that it's always good to look at governance. I think some of the problems have been overstated. I've always thought, with all due respect to a former member of the chair or the former chair of the Board of Governors, I've always thought it was unusual the way we select the Board of Governors. We actually have them lobby for their own election in the General Assembly. So the General Assembly elects all of them. I always thought, and I think the strength of the State Board of Education, I think, is that we all believe, whether it's right or wrong, and forgetting who the governor is for a second, that the governor is the person we elect to sort of be in charge. He's sort of the CEO, or she's sort of the CEO of North Carolina and ought to have a lot of input. I always thought that the governor should have some role in appointing most of those boards, not all the appointments, but some of them. I always thought it was interesting that there's not a requirement that the chairs of the board of the trustees of all the campuses aren't involved somehow. So we've had times, not much, but I think there's underrepresentation historically of historically black colleges and universities, and I think that has hurt them in the General Assembly. And one of the, you heard in Tom's introduction, I worked for Dan Blue, who before he went to Duke and sort of started cheering for the wrong basketball team, he was an undergrad at North Carolina Central. When I worked for him, we did a lot of work on, back then, it was early 90s, it was shocking how little money was spent on dormitories and other things at historically black colleges and universities, and that's not an accident if you had a board of governors that doesn't have a lot of representation from those. So I certainly think in the university governance structure, We need to do a lot, we could do a lot better.
Becky,
Not-
let's
that's
talk
not an-
about that a little bit. The legislature, this session of the legislature has recommended, by the way, there's 32 members. Back when we consolidated, huh?
24 now.
Well, it's 28, and then
Well,
it's
it's
going to
gonna be
24.
24.
This 32 members, back in 1972, when the university was actually consolidated into the system it is now, and we were bringing in junior colleges and other schools throughout the state, prior to that time, Bill Friday told me in an interview that he'd had 100 members of his board running those three campuses that we talked about earlier. Bob Scott was just absolutely, he was governor, was insistent that we have 32 members and that they be appointed by the legislature. Friday fought, and in one of the few instances lost that particular fight for those 32 members. Is this the right way to appoint boards of governors? Chris touched on it, back and forth. What do you think?
I fall into that camp. I think that each of those campuses should have representation on the Board of Governors. I'm not as concerned about who appoints those people as the quality of the appointees. And again, I think that each of the colleges within the university system should be represented on the Board of Governors. I think there should be a diverse Board of Governors. And Hannah and I were talking actually in the ladies' room as we were getting started, and she was telling me about some of the members who bring different things to the board. And so I think that having a pediatrician, having a medical person on the Board of Governors is a good idea. So,
But Howard, shouldn't we be concerned about who appoints these Board of Governors? One of the things that I'm sure you've watched over the period of time, Hannah said when she first went on to BOG, she did not know who was a Republican and who was a Democrat. It has gotten to the point now where it is very, very partisan, is it not?
It is very partisan, and I think it became really ugly when we changed presidents. That to me was the worst I think I've seen people making decisions that came off looking as partisan as it could be. I agree that the Board of Governors itself is probably larger than it should be, but I've always thought that each campus needs its own board of trustees to advocate and to oversee the operations of the campus because each campus is different. And I've often thought that the appointee to the Board of Governors should be the chairman of the local board of trustees. And then there would be a certain number of at-large positions that should be appointed by the governor. That was my position. I wondered why Governor Scott gave away that gubernatorial appointing power. And I think it was part of not having to negotiate it through the legislature. I was very much in the middle of that because I opposed the consolidation of the university system because I felt that the historical black schools were going to be impacted negatively by that whole process. I certainly eventually ended up endorsing it after I had prayer.
You were right again, weren't you?
Well, no, I had prayer with President Friday and decided that the smart thing to do would be to endorse it and move it forward.
I used to love Monday mornings whenever we talked about higher education on the show. I could expect about 8 o'clock a phone call from Bill Friday. And he was always so tactful. He wouldn't say, Tom, y'all sure screwed that up, or you got it wrong, or something like that. He'd say, you know, if you're going to talk about that subject again, you might want to consider this. And that was his way of telling me. Hannah, this thing about politicization of the BOG, I don't want to put you on the spot or
Let's go ahead and do.
Yeah, why not? Why not?
doggone it, Hannah. Come on
I'm
now.
turning out, it's okay.
It has gotten to the point where my sources tell me that BOG members are told not to even go talk to the legislature because it has gotten so that the pipeline between the legislature and the BOG is almost robbing them of autonomy to be able to operate the system.
It has. And I would say this, if the Democrats were in charge in Raleigh and it had appointed all Democratic members of the BOG. I think the problem we have now is we have one party in charge. They appointed only members of their own party to our board, and our board has become essentially a proxy for the General Assembly. Before 2011, the party in charge always included members of the minority party, both chambers. And so you had some pushback and you had fuller conversations. And I think we've got a problem because the other part of that is that our board members are very, very close to their good friends at the legislature. And often the president hears about things after the board members have.
So let's ask the question, is 32 members too many on the BOG? Did it need to be smaller? The legislature decided to move to 28 members this year, 24 members next year, primarily because we have people whose terms are not yet ended and need to be able to recycle some of these people off. So does it need to be smaller, Chris?
You know, I'm not sure. I would defer to Hannah on that. My worry is, as Senator Lee said, that I think it would be good to have a requirement there be one person, maybe it's the chair of the Board of Trustees, which would make up half of the board, and then have at-large seats. I don't know how many. But I also agree that it's a sad day that we don't have as much diversity in almost every way I can think of on the board, whether it's political party, whether it's representing HBCUs, whether it's gender. I think there's a lot of things we need to work on. And my fear is if we shrink the board, that makes that even more difficult.
So yesterday, the Senate elected their 6 nominees, next new members of the Board of Governors. They included former Senator Bob Rucho, a retired dentist from Matthews. Now, I heard a reaction out there.
And up here.
The reaction came when we read it. Tom Fetzer, who, by the way, lives here in Wilmington, former mayor of Raleigh, former head of the Republican Party in North Carolina, lives here in Wilmington, I meant to say. Marty Cotis, who is from Guilford County in the real estate business. Stephen Long, who is an incoming attorney, incoming member. Incumbent, I'm sorry.
Incumbent.
I can't read my own writing. And Randy Ramsey from Jarrett Bay Boat Works in Beaufort. So a lot of Easterners on this board and a few Westerners. Doggone.
And all white males.
And Harry Smith from Greenville, all Republicans.
And all white males.
And all white
And
males.
all white males. Yeah. Is this the way it ought to be, Becky?
No, of course it's not. And I think there needs to be a lot of input. I work at a think tank, so I think lots of ideas and lots of voices make anything richer. And I think that's certainly clear. One thing, we were talking about the number of members that are on there. Something else, too, that I think was really persuasive in this decision is that President Spellings weighed in and said that she felt like the board was too big to manage. And so, with these kind of questions, rather than just the legislature making these, I think there needs to be more conversation. I think we were talking about that, Howard, you made the point during the HB2 discussion earlier. Why don't people sit in a room and talk to each other face to face rather than doing it through press conferences or doing it through mandates? I think all these governance questions, it seems to me that some good conversations would be with Hannah Gage and Margaret Spelling, with Mark
But you gotta have
Johnson,
people willing
Superintendent
to
of
listen.
Education. Well, you got to have people willing to work together, and I think that comes really from meetings like this, rooms like this, people saying, look, we're tired of it, North Carolina will be better as people work together. That's a lesson we learned, I think, through the HB2
Well, you
debate.
mentioned the new president, Margaret Spellings. He's been in office now for a year, has been relatively quiet during that period of time while she's trying to get her feet out from under her. But I remember very well, underneath her, I remember very well a year ago, I said out from under her, didn't I? When she took office, she said she had 3 priorities so far as the university system: accessibility, affordability, and accountability. And I want to talk about each one of them. But I also would like to go among the 4 of you and just ask you to give me an assessment of how she's done her first year as president of the UNC system. And since we're talking about education, let's assign a letter grade for this, A being the top and F being the bottom. And Chris, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I would say somewhere in the B to B minus range. I think she's done okay. I don't think she's been the best president yet. She's still learning, I think, how North Carolina works. She's the first president outside of Molly Broad, who is not from North Carolina in a long time. She walked into North Carolina at the most tumultuous political time. She followed a popular president who was ousted in a way that upset a lot of people, whether it's a right thing or wrong thing. I think the process was very upsetting. So I think it took her probably 6 months just to get over the fact of how she came to power. So I think that I really wanted to give her an incomplete, but I think she shows promise. And I was happy that she spoke out.
That's the most
for-
generous you've ever been to a
well,
Republican, though,
well,
isn't
that's
it?
right. And I think she, for example, she spoke out and said HB2 is hurting the recruitment of faculty at North Carolina, which probably didn't make the General Assembly happy. So I think what we need there is a strong advocate for the university system, not a politician. And I think so far, she's on the right track.
Hannah, you were part of the group that hired her.
I was,
And
and I hired Tom Ross.
so you've,
So
you've watched her very carefully over every month over the last year or so. Give us your letter grade.
I'd give her a B+ or an A-. I think it took her at least 6 months to get her sea legs. I think when she visited campuses, this was one of the few that really embraced her, but, protesters were there to scream and holler at her because she was blamed for Tom Ross's hiring. She is a very smart, reasonable person that I think is focused on the right things, more focused on student success than we've had in a while, and I think that will benefit us. So I'm very optimistic. She had a good review. We reviewed her last month, and I think the board generally is pleased. The next, we didn't have very specific criteria for this review. Next year we will, but I think she's doing a good job.
Howard Lee, you're great.
Well, I had the privilege of working closely with the president while I was chairman of the state board and she's secretary of the Department of Education, and I was impressed with her administrative and executive skills at that time. I think she, as Chris indicated, came in under very trying circumstances. I do like the fact that she emphasizes what we've emphasized through the years: affordability, accessibility, and accountability overlaying our university system. And I feel that she has gone out and made herself available to different segments of the community to try to open up and maintain channels of communication. So I've been impressed. I would give her a B+ at this juncture.
Becky?
I'd probably give her an A-, and I agree with everything that the other panelists have said. I don't really have too much.
That's pretty rare.
Well, it is. No, it's not. I don't have too much to add, except that I think that she is one of those people who wants to sit down in rooms. She wants to have conversations. She wants to listen to people. She wants to get ideas. And one of the things that struck me when she first started, first of all, she stepped into a situation that was not her fault, no making of her own, that was very difficult, and I think that she has handled that with real grace. And then the other thing she did is she asked for some leeway in putting her staff together. She believes that good leaders hire the best people and have the best support behind her, and I think I know her staff. I think she's hired an incredible staff, and I think she's very promising. I think she has the potential for being one of the best university presidents North Carolina's ever had.
Wow. While we're talking together, let's go through some of her A's that she says she wants to attack, and we'll start with affordability. You brought your state constitution. I wrote down the Constitution when it comes to higher education says the University of North Carolina and other public institutions of higher education, as far as practicable, be extended to the people of the state free of expense. Now, there's been a lot of discussion. What does free of expense mean? What's your understanding of this?
Well, this has been debated. It's been litigated. The Supreme Court has looked at this over and over again. I think they will continue to. I mean, that's kind of the question. I mean, exactly what does that mean? And when you say, as far as practical, be extended to the people of the state free of expense, is that to the students? Are they applying to tuition? Or are they applying to taxpayers? I mean, these are all constitutional questions that we've talked about. I don't really, this is, I think, the hardest question that you'll ask. I don't really know the answer to that. Again, the courts have looked at this. I'm not sure what that means. But you asked in the context of Margaret Spelling. And I'll tell you what she's done and the legislature have done. They've begun to look at that and really take a hard look. And one of the things that they did is, you may be aware that now at 3 of the university campuses, there is a $500 minimum per semester for tuition. And it's a pilot program that they're trying to see how this works. So again, as far as finding affordability, making this available to families. The other thing I like that they've really done is they have set the deal where, when you enter the university, that tuition rate is guaranteed to you for 4 years. So as a family, as a student, if you're paying for your education yourself, you know what your obligation is, or you know what that's going to cost you. So I think looking at these things these ways is very important. I'm not sure constitutionally what that means, but I think looking at these different ideas, talking about things, trying out ideas is exactly the right way to go.
Chris, you've talked about this as free as practicable many times on our show. What's your understanding of it?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that they were talking about the value of a higher education, and they were trying to get our population educated so they could go on and do things and be better citizens and provide for their families and improve the life of the state as a whole. So I think it means as free as practicable as a cost to the citizens of North Carolina so their children can go to school. I think that we still have a long way to go to do that. I'm not opposed to having a $500 tuition at a couple of the historically black colleges and universities and one Western that's not. My worry, of course, is that means the schools raise less money, and the General Assembly is going to have to step in and give those schools the full budget that they used to get, making up for the lower tuition. And we've had almost $800 million in budget reductions in the to the university system since 2008. I think that has hurt our university system. We have, I just saw recently, I think it's 74% of our faculty have been contacted by other, at our two flagship schools, have been contacted by other universities that want to pay them higher money. I've heard Chancellor Woodson and NC State talk about this all the time. I think the pay raise last year was 1.5% for permanent faculty in North Carolina. It's the first real pay raise they've gotten, and that's really not much.
As it was with all state employees.
Right, but I mean, we are in a very competitive environment. My big worry is that we need to keep it affordable, which means the General Assembly needs to come up with the resources to fund these schools, all of them.
We talk about this, though, Hannah. Since 2010, college tuition costs have gone up 13% in North Carolina.
Yeah.
During this period of time, the average North Carolina family's income has been static to declining. We're told the average college student in America graduates with $25,000 in debt when they receive their diploma. Now, what that translates to is that if you're a young person getting started in a new professional life and you've got to, furnish apartments and do all of the other kinds of things that you got to do, you also got this $400, $500 a month debt service that you got to be paying off. Short of making college free, what can we do to rein in cost? We talked about the budget cuts.
Yeah, I actually think we've made some pretty significant steps. Becky alluded to one, and I think packaging college tuition now so that it's guaranteed for 4 years is important. We've capped tuition at 2%, excuse me, capped fees at 3%, but we also added debt service to the fees, and that has always been separate. So you could get your bill, and you'd have a tuition bill, then you'd have your fees, and then you could have $700 in debt service. So we've added those together, and I think there is a strong commitment to slow it down. But I think you take that, you couple it with the NC Promise, which is the $500 tuition schools, which we hope they will continue to fund at an adequate level. Then I think the next thing actually that would be a game changer, and this is unrelated to the university, but I think the plan to consider making community college free. I mean, higher ed is not just the university. We're looking at all 4 years. And I think you began to look at, the total array of options for middle-class families in North Carolina, lower middle-class families. So I think there are a lot of things being discussed right now for the first time with limits, with a lid. So I actually think we've made headway.
Yeah, as far as that goes, we're talking about this making community college free. This is one of Governor Cooper's proposals. Of course, he wants to use the lottery proceeds to be able to help do that. And you would receive this free tuition to a community college based on the fact that you've exhausted all all scholarships and grants that might be available to you, and you have to have at least a B average. The question here is, Howard, you think the legislature will go along with that?
Well, I don't know, but I certainly think the idea is a good one. But I don't know how we can keep relying on the lottery to underwrite all of these things that we're proposing. But my concern is that there are students or families that are well-heeled and they can pay almost anything to go to a university. The idea of the community college being free opens up the prospects of people who are not wealthy to have access to higher education, get 1 or 2 years in the community college, and then only have to go to a university to pay a higher fee later on after they've done that. that would save quite a bit of money and still keep the option open.
But what does that
But
do to
my
the-
concern is that universities have been notorious for coming in the back door with higher fees.
I was going to say, the cost of tuition's only part of the problem. I was telling the group when we were upstairs in the green room coming in here, my oldest grandchild graduated in December from state. It was not uncommon at all for, which had, really reasonable tuition, but it was not uncommon at all for his textbooks to cost $900 per semester. When you factor in living expenses, meals, everything else, we can talk about holding down tuition, Hannah. That's only part of the equation.
No, it is. And I think that this year we capped fees at 3%. We'll add debt service in, and I would be very surprised if it doesn't continue to go down, because the goal is for there to be no increase. And of course, that terrifies chancellors, because then they're looking at their operating expenses. But I think that our board as a whole has recognized that we went as far as we could. A lot of this started in the early 2000s when everybody was chasing national ratings and felt like we had to have everybody had to have 3 climbing walls and the fanciest this and the fanciest that. Then the recession occurred, and bad times make you do what you should have been doing all along. And I think that we're looking at these things very differently.
Okay, we got two different things coming in here. We got tuitions coming in, and then we've got cost of education. We've heard about the fact that the university system, Becky, has suffered budget cuts over the last few years. The question I think that is legitimate to ask, and I think fairly brave to ask on a university campus, is the university doing enough to hold down cost?
Well, I think Hannah alluded to that when she talked about, building climbing walls and those kind of things. State government is expected to live within their means. Families are expected to live within their means. And I don't think it's unreasonable to ask universities to live within their means as well, and to make those decisions and those priorities based on that. Which kind of circled back to when we first started this part of the conversation, Tom, about the mission of the universities and have we gotten away from the mission. I don't think we have. I think the growth of the universities, the research, the hospitals, the medical, I think all of that is great, but I think that we constantly have to ask ourselves, what is our mission, and are we true to our mission? And I think that question ought to be asked for every single line item that the university spends money on.
And of course, the other part of this equation, and Hannah, I'll go to you because I know you know this best. We subsidize every in-state student to the tune of about $9,000 a year. The taxpayers of North Carolina do. And yet, when you look at the amount of money that comes from the state, you look at the amount of money that comes in from tuition, it's chicken feed in the overall university budget. They're getting research grants. They got economic development grants that are taking place. They got donors giving money to the university. It's nowhere near as much of the equation of operating a university system today, is it?
No. No, it's not at all. I think that, you're talking about tuition and fees being nowhere near what we need.
Well, no, not just tuition and fees, but even the state grant to the university systems.
I feel like a traitor when I say this, but I think that.
Oh, go ahead. You're going off the board.
Well, I actually
Take
think.
the plunge, Hannah.
I actually think that if you look at us compared to other public systems, we have been funded generously.
Yes.
And I don't think that we have always done the best things with that money. And I think that has hurt us, because now I think we're doing a better job in using that money. I think we have been much more careful about how we allocate the resources. Ultimately the key is how you use what you get. And are you using it for the right things? And all I'm saying is, during the period of time when we were building what I refer to as the academic industrial complex, we lost sight of what we were doing. Students were secondary to institutional growth. I actually think we're in a good place now. I think we're looking at the right things. I think that when we go to the legislature and we ask for things, they're really things we need. And so this state is continuing to grow. We're going to continue to need more and more money for enrollment growth and lots of other things if we're going to play the role in the life of the state that the university has played before.
I got to tell you how delighted I am to hear you admit that, because I think that the truth of the matter is a lot of us who are looking at issues in North Carolina have suspected that maybe they'd taken their eye off the ball to some extent so far as the focusing on education is concerned. There are a number of other aspects of this, and I want to talk, Howard, because I want to get to the questions that you might have in the audience. Let's go to the business of education, because we're at a school of education. And Dean, I hadn't asked you what your enrollment numbers are looking like, but if you're typical of what's been going on in schools of education across the state of North Carolina, your enrollment numbers have been dropping fairly precipitously over the last few years. Howard, you were part of the legislature, I think, when we created this Teaching Fellows program, in which we were trying to encourage young people to go into education. And we told them at the time, if you will go into the classroom and teach 5 years after you graduate, your tuition will be free. You won't have to pay for it. The legislature did away with that a couple of years ago. There's some talk now that some form of this may be reinstituted. What's your take on all this?
Well, I certainly hope it will be, and let me interject in this that the School of Education here at this institution is one of the finest in the state. I've worked very closely with a number of the deans, and I'm extremely pleased with the quality of teachers, people they've turned out as teachers, and they've stayed in the area and really contributed. But the Teaching Fellows Program was one of the finest efforts to attract young people into teaching, and the rewards were great because they then could get a return on their investment. I think the legislature, again, made another knee-jerk reaction without thinking through the impact of their efforts, and I'm glad to see that some leaders, especially some with whom I've worked very closely, like Craig Horn out of Charlotte and some others, who really see the value, and they're going to try to get it redone, and I hope they will, because that would be a plus.
Chris, you talked about this many times on our show. In fact, I think you were mentioning last night that there's another state that started another Teaching Fellows program.
In 2011 was when the General Assembly cut its funding because they didn't like that the program was associated with Democrats, and it was part of that sort of when the Republicans got in control. They did a lot of those sorts of things. But last year there was a state, Indiana, who called the Public School Forum of North Carolina, which used to run the Teaching Fellows Program, asked them all these questions, modeled their Teaching Fellows Program after the one that North Carolina abolished in 2011. And the person who's at the bill signing ceremony who said it was the greatest thing in his state in a long time was Mike Pence. So
I've heard that name before.
Yeah, I've heard that name before. So it's interesting that the General Assembly here thought it was a bad idea, and they abolished the funding for it. And Mike Pence in Indiana had a big press conference. It was on the front page of the Indianapolis newspaper talking about how great it was.
That's wild.
Can I just give a quick update on that?
Of course you
Because
can.
I've been watching it pretty carefully. As Howard mentioned, Representative Craig Horn is really the leader on that issue in the House. That bill is getting a great reception, good questions in committee, and I will go out on a limb and say I think that's going to pass, and I think that we'll have a teaching fellow program reinstated at this session.
But it's worth noting it's not going to provide nearly as many scholarships as the old Teaching Fellows.
Well, and the other part of it is we are staring down the barrel of a teacher shortage in North Carolina in the next few years, because we have a cadre of teachers who, not just age-wise, but tenure-wise, are getting up into the 20 and 30-year range so far as their teaching experience is concerned, and they're going to retire. I want to talk about the switch gears just slightly, because I want to take questions from the audience, and we're running out of time. Howard, I can't remember whether it was Chris or whether it was Hannah that talked about faculty salaries. There has been a race for paying faculty salaries. There's no question about it. But President Spellings has been saying we're losing the battle in being able to recruit good faculty in North Carolina at our university system because of our salary structure, and there are limits to what they can pay.
Well, there's no question that universities are raiding each other all across the country, and certainly we have become one of the
Like
targets
an arms
for that.
race.
Yeah. But, you know, faculty members at UNC can just walk down the road to Duke and get a much better salary than they're getting at UNC.
And watch better basketball.
Hey.
Now you're starting to matter.
And Duke is going to be watching some good basketball this weekend.
I think I'm in Tar Heel country here. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead and finish.
But I think it's very important for us to recognize that as we lose good fact that the faculty that I'm most concerned about are those who bring in the research dollars. And if we lose those folk, we are talking about losing millions from our university systems. I know that the smaller institutions may not fall so much into that category, but still, people who choose to come to Wilmington do expect to be paid decent salaries when they come, and we're not doing that.
Switching gears again, because, again, we're running out of our allotted time, and I want to keep us on time as much as I can. One of the common complaints that we hear across North Carolina from employers is they have jobs to offer, but they can't find people with the job skills that they need to be able to fill those jobs. Now, my question, Hannah, is whose job is this? Is it a K-12 job? Is it the community college's job? Is it the university's job? Is it all of their jobs?
I think it's everybody's job. I think that basic, vocational training should come from the community colleges, but I think the universities need to do a better job in making sure that every graduate, whether it's a French major, has some skills, some specific skills. And that's an easy thing to do because we're teaching those things. But you've got to direct, we need better counseling so that students actually take a business course. A French major can take a business course. They can take a semester of Excel. They can leave with their French degree thinking that they will always teach French and wake up one day and want to have an online tutoring company in French, and they'll know how to do it. I think that part of it is making sure that students leave with some tools.
But Howard, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. This goes into what was called articulation between the K-12, the community colleges. They ain't talking to each other. The truth of the matter is, if it's all their jobs, if it's everybody's job to turn out people who have skills, what do we do to get them to cooperate better?
Well, my biggest disappointment is that Governor Hunt put in place something called the Education Cabinet, but we never did anything with it except have it on paper. Governor Perdue came in and asked me to come in and put together the Education Cabinet, and I did my best, but never could get people to do anything other than come to a meeting and talk and not follow through on anything. I will give Governor McCrory credit. He did give a great deal of more effort as governor himself directly in trying to make that cabinet functional, but it still didn't do what needed to be done. I think
Which goes back to, do we need one person in charge of all the
Czar.
education in North Carolina?
Well, we certainly need someone who has the power and the authority to drive the decision makers from these various institutions to talk to each other. But I'm going to tell you, we really have dropped the ball in terms of preparing youngsters for the workplace K-12, because we have not introduced any kind of job evaluation or skill development in the 9th and the 10th grades of middle and high schools, which we need to get back to.
Let's cite evidence of that. In talking to community colleges as well as universities, 60% of our high school graduates, 60% of the kids who get diplomas from high school have to take remediation courses in colleges because they can't do basic English. They can't do basic math. Now, something's not right here. Either our high schools don't understand what's required or our colleges have unrealistic expectations. Chris, which is it?
Well, I don't think it's unrealistic expectation. I think it's something we ought to work on and emphasize and figure out a testing regime that makes sense, that doesn't overtest kids, to come up with a way to make sure that they learn those things. I don't think it's that complicated. And figure out a way to help these low-well schools that have the kids who are struggling.
And while we're talking about, this problem, there's another one. We're talking about employers not being able to find people with the job skills that they're looking for. Another study among businesses, and your website reported this, I guess it was last week, talked about the fact that employers are saying they're disappointed in graduates, particularly college graduates, critical thinking skills, seeking out, evaluating, weighing the evidence, coming to conclusions. This analytical, critical thinking is very disappointing to them. They're saying that our colleges and universities just aren't teaching critical thinking. Now, is this because, Becky, the universities don't understand what the businesses need, or what?
No, and I think that doesn't start at the university level. That actually starts in the K-12 level. And again, these silos that have been created, and the territorial attitude that has emerged with this. We talk about the governance of these things. And I think this begins in elementary school and goes all the way through the university system. That responsibility, we need to look at curriculum, we need to look at how it works together, we need to look at the end game as the goal rather than the end of grade testing goal, and to have that all the way through. But Tom, I wanted to mention too, in this, the responsibility of the business community and what they expect. There's actually, and then what the universities or the schools provide, there's actually a third leg of that stool that I would argue, and that's the students themselves. And I think that, we need to expect more of the students. They need to do their homework to understand that if I'm going to invest and if I'm going to go into debt to get a college education, that I have prepared myself for the business opportunities are out there. So I think it's a responsibility on all three of those.
Yeah,
places.
unfortunately, about a third of the questions I had prepared for tonight, we didn't get a chance to get around to, so we got to come back again next year and do this, because that is certainly one area that we want to talk about. I want to take your questions now. They don't have to be about education. Feel free to offer any questions you might ask. You can direct them to an individual panelist, or you can just direct them to all the panelists. Again, let's keep the questions relatively short, and let's take them. Yes, sir.
All right. Excuse me. Well, you pontificated on that there's going to be a teacher shortage. What are you doing to make sure we stay in education and we stay teaching?
Good question.
That is a good question.
Is teacher pay all that there is to keeping teachers in the classroom, Chris?
No, but it's a good start. And we still, despite the increases lately, we still have lower average teacher pay in North Carolina than every state that borders North Carolina. We're 41st in the country. So we got to do a whole lot better. In year 2000, we were at the national average. I always thought that was a weird measure. I don't want to be the national average. I think we should be above the national average, and without going into too much detail, but pay is just part of it. I thought one of the most fascinating things the legislature's done in the recent years is they created a tax credit for teachers, a small, tiny one, for teachers who buy their own supplies in the classroom. Then they later came back and repealed it. Then they came back and added it. Now, what in the world are we expecting teachers to buy their own supplies for? Imagine going at a job, going to IBM and going to work and saying, welcome to work, you have to buy your computer and your desk. So I think part of this is respect, part of it is pay, part of it is support people that used to work at schools to help teachers that aren't there anymore, part of it is facilities. We've let our public schools, the schools buildings themselves deteriorate. It's not a secret that people aren't quite as excited about going into teaching or staying there once they get there. It's about respect and investment.
And Howard, a lot of it is about the administrator and principal that's in that school. I remember Don Stedman saying, you give me a school with average teachers and a great principal, and I'll show you a great school.
Absolutely, and that was one of the points I wanted to make, is that, number one, if we have a good administrator, that person will know what the teacher needs in order to reinforce that teacher and to have her feel both appreciated as well as supported. But more importantly, teaching is an ongoing learning process, and we have not done a very good job of providing professional development for teachers who need to make sure that they keep their skills current. And so if we can provide professional development, support, and encouragement, it will, I think, inspire a lot of people to stay. And then finally, Chris alluded to it, the atmosphere of the school makes a difference. If it's a school that has a high discipline level, teachers are going to find a way to get out of that very quickly, no matter how much we pay them or whatever else we do to try to keep them.
You mean high discipline problems?
High discipline problems, yes.
And I remember as a boy, if I got disciplined in school, it wasn't nothing like what I got when I got home.
Tom, I'd like to add just two things to that. I agree with Chris and that pay is important. I mean, I think we can all agree with that. But something else too, I think, is getting rid of the red tape, getting rid of all the administrative requirements for teachers.
Amen.
Free them up to do what they love to do and what they want to do, and that's to teach kids, not to fill out paperwork.
I think you have some friends. Next question. Yes, sir.
Teaching is the noblest of professions, but the sorriest of trades. One can make more money collecting garbage. In a right to exploit state, not right to work, but to exploit state. I'm a retired professor here at UNCW after 51 years in the classroom, 20 of which were here at UNCW. And we saw 6 consecutive years without a raise, finally 1.5%. This is abysmal.
Is there a question here somewhere?
My question is, in a right to exploit state, what are the prospects of collective bargaining, unions, and a voice from the faculty?
All right. Anybody want to tackle that?
You're not likely to get any kind of collective bargaining in North Carolina. It's a right to work state, and so you're not going to get it. Secondly, I'm not sure that I'm one who would think teachers need to be in a collective bargaining environment. I think what we have to do as voters is to recognize that our legislature has a definite responsibility to pay decent salaries and to underwrite the costs of running our schools. And that has to come from the public putting pressure on the legislature to get it done. But if we hold out for collective bargaining or something of that sort, because we are a right-to-work state, I think you'd be wasting time trying to go down that road.
Yeah. Next question. Yes, sir.
I really appreciate the panel being here today. I have a question as it relates to the relationship in terms of funding and function between higher education, K through 12, and the Department of Corrections.
I don't understand.
Your question is, how do the funding levels of all three equalize to each other, or?
And how has funding of Department of Corrections affected other educational areas?
Oh, Department of Corrections. Okay, I didn't get that part of it. I'm not sure I'm qualified to comment on that part of it, but I think.
Well, don't let that stop you.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's never stopped us before. My mother used to say that she was going to put on my dad's tombstone, often wrong, never in doubt. You know. Becky, you've got the card showing percentages of where our education funding goes, and I'm sure you'd be willing to give them out, but just cite those.
Yeah.
It's something like.
I'm not.
By the
sure
way,
if this
education
answers
in
your-
North Carolina is like 57 cents of every tax
Yes,
we spend every.
57%. We do these fast fact cards at the organization I work for every year, so I'll leave them here on the corner of the table if you want one. But you can see how often I use these when we get good questions like this. But so this is for the current year's budget. The total education budget is $12.7 billion. It's 57% of the state budget. Of that, K-12 is, I'm rounding here, $9 billion. Community colleges is $1 billion, and universities is $3 billion. The justice and public safety budget is 12% of our state budget, as compared to with 57% of the education budget.
I wondered if one of the things he was getting at, and I don't know, I'm just guessing, is that about how we spend our dollars and where our priorities are. And one of the things that this General Assembly did a few years ago was abolish funding for something called drug treatment courts, which is one of the most successful programs in the country. It costs $3,000 a nonviolent offender who has a drug addiction. Intensive treatment, 75% of the people are still drug-free, aren't rearrested after 5 years. We completely abolished that program, even though it costs $3,000 per offender, in contrast to $30,000 a year per offender to lock them up in prison. So there's an example of something I cannot it's as baffling as teaching fellows. Why in the world we would end a program that saves money and helps people turn their lives around and spends money that we could use for education or teaching fellows or whatever else.
Did we nibble around an answer to that question for you?
Thank you. I was just very curious about how we could do better at getting some kids that have high needs into an educational system as opposed to a correctional system?
Well, we could spend another whole program on that.
Can I just address that just real quick? That's a real issue that we've seen, and what we have now is where we used to have principals and teachers that handled discipline in our schools, we now have police officers in our schools that are handling the discipline. And so what happens is, rather than going to the principal's office and a call to your mom or dad saying, you know, your son got a little over anxious and, you know, got in a fight with a classmate, we now have them going down to the police station and being booked for crimes. This is a real issue in our criminal justice system, and with the 16 and 17-year-olds being tried as adults in North Carolina, that's something that the General Assembly is looking at. It came out from Chief Justice Martin's latest look at the criminal justice system and things that we can do. Raise the age is sort of the catchphrase, if you will, that we're
And you're gonna
looking
see
at.
some action on that in this
Take
legislation.
16 and 17-year-olds out of the adult system and put them into the juvenile system where their families are involved, there's family counseling, there's education, you know, a lot of things like that. I hope that maybe addresses
But Becky,
a little
some
bit
of
more
this
your
goes
question.
a little deeper than that. A lot of friends are teachers, and they tell me that, using your analogy, if they call, first of all, if they send the kid to a parent, to the principal, relatively nothing happens. If they call the parent wants to get into an argument with them about their child not being well disciplined in the classroom. Can you understand how they've turned to
Of
police
course,
officers?
and maybe this is an area that we really need to look at. We really need to make some substantive changes.
But this is a problem that starts at home, not necessarily in the school. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, often, I think that's the case. Again, you know, I mean, and this goes to, and I know we don't have time to get into all this, but, you know, the whole cycle of poverty and the whole cycle of addiction, and, you know, how do you get kids out of that?
Yeah.
Lots
Next
of
question.
things to address, certainly.
Yes, sir.
Question, and this could be a whole a series of meetings altogether, but talk a little bit about school choice and what's happening in North Carolina and what's coming.
Well, I think we can say that we've got it, and it's going to get bigger. I don't think there's any question about the fact that, particularly in this era, our legislature has a big appetite for increasing the number of charter schools and also increasing the voucher program for low-wealth parents to be able to send their kids to private schools. And I don't see anything changing that. Their justification in many instances is that the public schools aren't getting the job done. They want to give parents the choice. The other side of that is if we take too many kids out of the, particularly, frankly, with the high achievers and high performers going to charters and schools, then what do you end up with in the public education system? So it is a conundrum, and we could spend and have sessions on that before.
I hope that, I'll just add, and we could go on, and I'll probably disagree with maybe some people here about this. My big worry about it, I don't support them in any capacity, but my big worry is they're completely unaccountable. We have now hundreds of, we're going to have $150 million in voucher money in the next per year in 10 years that we spend in schools. We don't know what they're teaching. We have schools that openly discriminate, that say if a kid has gay parents, you're not welcome at our school, even though taxpayers are paying for the school. We have voucher schools that are teaching kids that dinosaurs and humans coexisted on Earth. They're using a ABECA textbook curriculum. 70% of our voucher schools are religious schools. More than half of those use those textbooks. So we have completely unaccountable schools that are doing some things that I think the taxpayers have a right to know if we are spending taxpayer money on those schools.
And that is a problem, and nobody wants to make them accountable.
Other states that have vouchers do have more accountability.
Okay. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I have a question, actually. Did somebody?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
That's all right. Somebody was raising their hand below you, but go ahead.
Sorry. You spoke about preparedness for universities and how that is affected from K-12, but do you feel like North Carolina as a state is giving enough support to early childhood education before they reach kindergarten, as far as the early development in those formative years?
Howard, you're our education guru, and this is right in your wheelhouse.
We are not, and of course, there have been multiple efforts to try and enhance that. Go back to Governor Hunt, who really put in place Smart Start that has been extremely effective. Governor Easley came along and put in something more at 4, and that has been very effective. We still have waiting lists of kids for early childhood education programs, and we tried to resolve the problem by allocating 50% of the lottery proceeds to go to support education, and that now has been reduced to 17%. And so we've kind of taken I came off of a farm, so let me use this analogy. We've taken the cow that was giving the most milk and put it out to pasture and don't milk it anymore. And I think if we want to really deal with this problem, that would be a start. Put the lottery money back to where it was intended to go when we first enacted the lottery.
All right.
I would just add to that, too. This is one of those programs that research shows us that particularly low-income children get tremendous advantage from preschool and those enrichment programs. And rather than having universal preschool for everybody, even from high-wealth families, I'd like to see those resources really dedicated to those that most need it and that most benefit from it.
Another question up here.
With a reduction in class size, what is the state's plan to keep arts and physical education in our schools?
They are talking about that this week, as a matter of fact. I don't know that a firm answer has been decided about that. Anybody?
Well, the House has passed a bill to give the schools flexibility about how you use that money. The Senate has not taken that bill up yet. I find that as a conundrum, because the General Assembly last year said you have to reduce class size, but they didn't give additional money to the schools to reduce class size. So now the solution is we're going to give you more flexibility so you don't have to reduce class size. What about giving them additional funding so they can reduce class size?
Well, actually, Chris, they have. Over the last 2 years, there's been over $100 million that has been allocated for reduction of class size, direction from the General Assembly of here's the money to do this. What's happened is the local school districts have not always done that, and they do have flexibility. So they are within their rights, if you will, or authority to use some of that money to hire arts teachers or PE teachers or those kind of things, but the money was allocated to reduce class sizes. And so now that the General Assembly has come back and said, okay, we gave you the money, why haven't you reduced the class sizes, for the school systems to come back and say, well, now we'll have to fire the arts teacher that we used the money we were supposed to use to reduce class sizes. So there's that discussion going on at the General Assembly now about that.
They got survey data from 113 of 115 school districts, and I don't actually think that that's the case. The schools are still not getting the funding they need to do both of those things, and they should.
And I don't know where they're going to find the room within the schools.
I was getting ready to say the physical classroom space.
They don't have the classroom. What they did is when they took teacher assistants out of the school, they made a terrible mistake. Teacher assistants were one of the added values that we had in classrooms, that even if the classroom was large, that could give some relief to the teacher, and we found even data proves that during that time, student performance was at a much higher level than what it is now. I'm in and out of classrooms and have been for the last 5 years under my education foundation, and I see teachers absolutely stressed trying to manage classes of 30 and 35 kids at every conceivable level you can think of, and they have to give attention to the lowest performing child because that's the one who's going to drag the school down and get it rated an F if they don't perform.
Chris, to your point, what was it Churchill said? It was a riddle clouded by a mystery, surrounded by an enigma.
Right, something like that.
Yeah. You see this in the university problem.
Yeah, you know, one thing I'd like to say, we're talking about all the needs that are not being met, and they're very real. And we're also going through a time in our state where we've had enormous tax cuts, you know, for the top group. And so I think that we have done a lot. These are self-inflicted wounds, because a lot of that money that, you know, is going or is staying in people's pockets should be used for public education.
All right. Next question. We'll take one or two more. Yes, ma'am.
About being a university and having researchers and everything like that. How are we utilizing the research that's being done on how children learn and how that's changed in the last 50 years, and putting that back into the education that we're giving the people that are in education, going out to be new teachers?
Good question. Howard, tee off on that one.
I didn't hear the question.
Well, just make up an answer then.
Well, I could, you know,
Repeat the
I can
question.
I can make a stab. I
All
think
right.
one of the things that's going on, and this is a work in progress, is that, we have, and Dan is this, we have been working really hard to take best practices in research from all of our education schools so that we're at least communicating the things that are working and making sure that we are executing some of these things. But I think it has taken, and it will continue to take intense focus on what is going on in education. And the university has been focused on so many things that I don't know that that's gotten adequate attention. I think in our strategic plan that was just approved, there's going to be a lot more attention on that.
I think it's certainly an issue that you want to do a follow-up? Yes.
From the standpoint of using research, what about interdisciplinary research so that you use the scientific research that's coming out from other disciplines to impact how you are in education approaching teaching? Are you working with the doctors? Are you working with the neuroscientists? Are you working with behavior specialists?
This is and I hear you, and I think you're absolutely right. These are things that go on campuses, and so I don't have the kind of expertise to answer that in a really informed way. But I think that the education deans and the chancellors are looking at the interdisciplinary exchanges and making sure that we're doing everything. So I
And
wish
Dean Dempsey could
Dan was in
probably,
here.
he could probably speak to that, how well this research is translating into our schools of education. You want to take a stab at that?
Sure, I don't think there's any question you see those kind of intersections in faculty work at this institution and at others. The more complicated work is how that gets translated down into classrooms. We do that through professional development, we do that through collaborative partnerships, we do that through the way we prepare educators. But I think that we can, as colleges of education are supported to be able to do that with the broader university and community partners, we can be even better than that, better at that than we are.
I can tell you that the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Center in Chapel Hill has done a marvelous job in pulling together data and working closely with schools and with educators as well as schools of
Recognized
education
nationwide.
to try and get that done.
Folks, we have run over our allotted time. We have had a great time. I'd like for you to give a round of applause to Chris Fitzsimon, Hannah Gage, Howard Lee, and Becky Gray. So, Dean, did we end up making everybody mad? Did we confuse everybody?
Make everybody happy.
Maybe yes to both of those. I want to close with 2 or 3 thoughts, and then we're going to move up to the reception. One, the Teaching Fellows Bill that's currently in the General Assembly funds 5 institutions that will be able to distribute that scholarship. And what some of that has to be a mix of public and private. I am pretty confident. I heard the panel say the Watson College of Education should be one of those 5 institutions. That was what. That's the way I heard it. And I like to close as an academician with quotes. And this is a panel that engages in balanced debate for the Old North State. The first quote to play off the Old North State is the North Carolina State toast. Here's to the land of the longleaf pine, the summer land where the sun doth shine, where the wheat grows strong and the strong grow great. Here's to down home, the Old North State. And from the official state song, the Old North State. Though she envies not others their merited glory, say whose name stands the foremost in liberty's story. Though too true to herself ere to crouch to oppression, who can yield to just rule a more loyal submission? If North Carolina, in the communities we live in the places where we learn, and the places where we educate people to learn, are going to be the kind of places where the weak grow strong and the strong grow great, and where we are too true to ourselves to crouch to oppression, as North Carolinians, we have to engage in an open, honest, and transparent debate about education and learning, and we have to be committed to doing the things that we know are in the best interest of children. I want to thank everybody for being here. Let's thank the panel one more time. Right after this, we're going to go up to the Clock Tower Lounge, which is upstairs at the end of the building. The panelists will be with us for the reception, so you'll have a chance to follow up, ask questions. Thank you.
I'd probably be good if I did another show right now, because I kind of get it.